In episode 6, Billy goes back to the location where he's keeping Dr. Samir, and he, along with Joe Kessler, intimidate Dr. Samir and tell him you have a week to recreate this virus. No matter what Dr. Samir says or what kind of pushback he gives, both Billy and Joe Kessler aren't hearing any of it. And maybe Billy's prickly mood has to do with the fact that that brain tumor is really affecting him. He starts throwing up. He starts seeing visions of Becca again. They both realize, though, that they're going to need to get Samir the proper equipment to actually recreate this virus. And when they think they do that, they present it to him, only for Dr. Samir to say, you don't understand. I actually can't recreate it because I can't control it. What we found out is to make it powerful enough to kill Homelander, it was unstable. And what would happen is it would go around and it would kill every soup. Everyone. It'd be a global pandemic that would only affect soups. And with Becca in his ear, she reminds Billy that means killing Kimiko, killing Starlight, and more importantly, killing Ryan. But Joe Kessler, he doesn't care about any of that. And that's when Joe starts to argue with Becca. Because Joe has been a figment of Billy's imagination this entire time. And when Billy figures it out, he's stunned. And Kessler tells him, yeah, the real Joe Kessler died years ago. Out of all the people that your brain could have cooked up, it cooked up me, and I'm literally you. I'm your deep inner thoughts. So when I say that you want to do something, you actually want to do it. I killed Ezekiel for you. I am inside you. I am you. It's as if Billy Butcher literally has the version of the devil and the angel on each shoulder talking to him. Now, as Billy deals with the fact that he's got imaginary friends, back at the Flatiron building, Starlight, Huey, and Mother's Milk are chilling after dumping a bunch of Huey's father's ashes around the city. Kimiko had gone to visit Frenchie in prison. She's still really upset about the fact that he turned himself in without talking to her, but unfortunately for Kimiko, Frenchie doesn't want to see any visitors. So it's just those three in the Flatiron building when Mother's Milk gets a phone call from the A-Train freaking out after what the group did to Cameron Coleman. He tells Mother's Milk everything, but he's telling him this in order to let him know why he's quote-unquote done. And Mother's Milk tries to talk him off the ledge and let him know that they'll figure this out, everything will be okay. The bigger issue for Mother's Milk is the fact that after A-Train explains the entire scenario, it seems like Homelander, Sister Sage, and even Tech Knight, they're planning something big. They need to figure out what that thing is. This actually ends up being perfect timing because Tech Knight is planning on having a big party that night at his house. Huey asks the question, how are we supposed to sneak into an alt-right cocktail party? And Mother's Milk has that planned out, thanks to a guy named Webweaver. That's the guy that Billy used to get the information on Firecracker. And the issue with Webweaver is he's a drug addict. So Mother's Milk brings him some of the goods, it knocks him out for 48 hours, and then they take his suit. They put Huey in that suit. He's got a mask on, so they figure that no one's really going to be able to see him. But what they want Huey to do is infiltrate this alt-right party, put a bunch of bugs around the party so they can listen in on exactly what is being discussed and then get the hell out of there. I mean, after all, Tech Knight is basically a walking Sherlock Holmes. He'll be able to tell if Huey's heart rate is sped up or if he's lying or if he gets nervous or really any of that. But make no mistake about it, Huey is taking all of the risk. And that night, Mother's Milk, Kimiko, Starlight, they sit in a van outside as Huey gets into the party. And when I say Tech Knight hosts this party at his house, what it really is a mansion. Tech Knight is basically a real-life version of Batman. He's got a butler who raised him since birth. He's got family money, and that family money comes from hunting down slaves. That's what his ancestors did, and that's how they passed down the money. And he's kind of doing the modern version of that because he has a bunch of prisons. As he's bragging to both Firecracker and the A-Train about this money, he explains how it's really a rinse and repeat situation. He puts people in prison, he quote-unquote rehabilitates them, and then when he lets them out, they're back in prison again. He explains to Firecracker, everything you see here is not entertainment money. No, it's prison money. And it's not like he's ashamed about this. No, Tech Knight is very, very proud of the fact that this is how he made his fortune. But as Tech Knight and the rest of the partygoers are just kind of enjoying the cocktail hour, that's when Huey makes his entrance. He's trying to be as inconspicuous as possible. He's going around the party, he's placing the bugs everywhere, and that's when he bumps into an unsuspecting guest and that guest is Victoria Newman. And when Huey sees Newman, he kind of freezes. He wasn't expecting her to be there. The good news for Huey is Victoria Newman just assumes that it's Webweaver because that's who's in front of her, at least the suit. So that conversation never really goes anywhere, and it allows Huey to continue to go around and plant bugs. But just a few seconds after talking to Victoria Newman, that's when Tech Knight sees him, and he gets really excited. Tech Knight invited Webweaver here for one specific reason, and he mentions, I didn't expect you to be into the whole sidekick thing, but yeah, let me show you around. And Huey, not wanting to raise any alarms, just goes with the flow, following Tech from room to room and letting him talk mostly. All the while, Huey is pointing out like artwork on the wall and rooms that they're going into, but he's mainly doing that just to let his team back in the van know that he's okay. When they get into Tech's office, though, that's when Tech says to Huey, do you want to see the Tech Cave? He then pulls a book off the shelf, which reveals a hidden elevator, and Huey and Tech get inside and they go down. But when they do that, the communication between Huey and the van outside goes dark because they're going underground. And that freaks Annie and Mother's Milk and Kimiko out. The fact that they sent Huey in there and they can't communicate with him and they don't know how he's doing, knowing full well he's not a soup and he can't really handle himself, it stresses the group out to the point where they know we need to go in there and we need to save him. But as Tech Knight and Huey head down to the, quote, Tech Cave, back up at the party, Homelander and Sister Sage link up with Victoria Newman and they explain the plan for the night. They've accumulated all of these heavy hitters, billionaires, the 1% of the 1%, for one specific reason. Because they want to enact the 25th Amendment. And if you're not up on the amendments, that's the one that says the vice president can become president if the current president is impeached or steps down or gets Abe Lincolned. After Sister Sage explains this to Victoria Newman, she heads off, which leaves both Newman and Homelander. And Homelander mentions how he heard that Stan Edgar was released from prison, and he's not quite sure how, but yeah, he's out on the run. Victoria Newman, though, plays it off very cool, just telling Homelander that she hadn't heard that news, but she knows that Stan Edgar can't hurt them anymore. While Homelander, Newman, and Sage wait for the right moment to address the group of people, Mother's Milk, Kimiko, and Starlight have already made their way into the house covertly. Mother's Milk tells both women, just split up, try to stay out of sight, but try to find Huey. Starlight, however, is caught by Firecracker, of all people. For whatever reason, Firecracker was invited to this party, even though the Deep and Noir weren't. But Sister Sage makes it very clear to Firecracker that she doesn't really have a place there. That caused Firecracker to just want to get out of the room for a second, and that's when she ran into Annie. And Annie goes to defend herself against any possible attack from Firecracker, but her powers still aren't working. She's still kind of flickering a bit. When Firecracker sees that, she backs her into a corner and starts trying to intimidate her. And the whole time, Annie is just apologizing for everything that's happened. But what Firecracker doesn't notice is Annie has a syringe, and she plunges that syringe right into Firecracker's neck, which knocks her out. Annie continues to make her way through the house, and Kimiko and Mother's Milk have already linked up, and they're starting to follow the clues that Huey had given them, unintentionally. But it leads them to Tech Knight's office where the hidden elevator is. They aren't alone, though. Sister Sage was in that room. She didn't want to be mingling at this party with these people, so she decided to go read. But before she can tip off anybody to the fact that the boys are there, Mother's Milk has a gun pointed at her head. And he lets her know that if she screams, he's going to shoot and kill her. Kimiko then goes to work on trying to find out which book leads to this elevator. But Sister Sage also goes to work, trying to rattle Mother's Milk. And it's working, because she knows a lot about Janine, and a lot about what Janine is going through at school with the recent outbursts. And as much as Mother's Milk is trying to keep his cool, he's having problems. So when Sister Sage makes a break for the alarm, instinctively, Mother's Milk shoots her. Right in the head. Mother's Milk's kind of appalled at what he just did, but he doesn't really have time to react too much because Kimiko has found the elevator. However, Mother's Milk's body betrays him. He starts having what he thinks is a heart attack and ends up being a panic attack, but he just collapses. And Kimiko knows that she can't just leave him there, especially not with Sister Sage's body also a few feet away. She has to go get help. She's able to get the attention of the A-Train and lure him upstairs to show him what's going on. And at first, in typical A-Train fashion, he doesn't want to help, but Kimiko is able to convince the A-Train to take Mother's Milk to the hospital, or else he's going to die, and, well, he's got a daughter. And tugging at those heartstrings does end up working because the A-Train ends up rushing him to the hospital, dropping him off on a gurney, but feeling good about himself because he was seen by a little boy who was just amazed that he just witnessed the A-Train saving someone's life. That's going to leave just Annie and Kimiko to head in this elevator and try to find out if Huey is still alive. What neither woman noticed was the fact that Sister Sage had gotten up and left, because just like with the lobotomy, she didn't die. That bullet grazed her brain, and she does have brain damage, but because of her powers, that brain will grow back and she'll be fine. Of course, Kimiko and Starlight, they're not worried about any of that. They're just worried about Huey. And Huey is alive. You know that old adage about not meeting your heroes because they don't live up to it? Huey found that out. He idolized Tech Knight as a kid. What he didn't know about Tech Knight was he was into some kinky shit. And we don't kink shame on this channel, but I'm talking serious BDSM, and that is why he wanted Webweaver. He wanted Webweaver so he could be his toy, basically. And it wasn't just Tech Knight, it was also Ashley. She's into that stuff too. Once again, we're not kink shaming. But after Ashley got her rocks off and headed back up to the party, Tech Knight noticed that Webweaver didn't know his own safe word. And that tipped off Tech Knight into the fact that something might not be quite right. When he ripped off Webweaver's mask, he noticed that it was Huey, and he decided to make him pay. Now, it is worth mentioning that while all of this was happening, Tech Knight's old quote-unquote sidekick was chained up in the corner with a gimp mask on. So normally Huey would be terrified, but the fact that he sees what happened to the old quote-unquote sidekick, it's got him even more terrified. But Tech Knight doesn't plan on just chaining Huey up. No. He plans on creating new holes, if you will, and using those holes. And that is when Starlight and Kimiko make their way downstairs and see what's happening. And they save Huey just in the nick of time. They're able to chain Tech Knight up, and they start trying to torture him, but it's really tough to torture a masochist. They're kind of into that. And as Huey is racking his brain, trying to figure out how they're going to extract any information from Tech Knight as to what he and Sister Sage and Homelander are up to, that's when the old sidekick is finally able to bust out of those chains, and he wants to help. He shows the group how you torture a masochist, or at least how you torture Tech Knight. You open up his bank account, and you threaten to give away money to left-wing organizations. And boy, does that work. I mean, the group did a lot of good work, giving millions of dollars away, but what they also found out was that Homelander and Sister Sage are planning on using Tech Knight's prisons as basically internment camps. As the three of them are trying to process this information, they hear Tech Knight starting to choke, and that's because Tech Knight's butler, the guy who raised him, is strangling him. Now, this butler dealt with a lot of crap throughout the years with Tech Knight, but prison camps, he's not dealing with that. He tells the group, get out of here, go. I'll make this look like an accident. So the butler and the old sidekick take care of Tech Knight, while Huey, Kimiko, and Starlight head out with all the information that they needed. And while that was going on upstairs, Homelander and Victoria Newman told the group of billionaires their plan on the 25th Amendment. The issue is, Sister Sage was supposed to explain most of the plan, but she choked because she had that brain injury. Her brain hadn't healed up to the point where she could end up making a speech, so she's in the corner looking like a fool, and Victoria Newman has to save the day, but she does do it. She explains to the group, look, if you put me in power, I will do what you guys need. It seems like at the end of the night, even though Sister Sage choked, the plan is full steam ahead. But there's one person who's going to try to take advantage of the fact that Sister Sage had brain damage, and that's Firecracker. She hasn't forgotten about what Sister Sage did to her, setting her up on national TV to get her ass kicked. She wants revenge. The next day, she heads to Homelander's apartment, and she explains, it's really weird. I saw Starlight last night, and Tech Knight died. And while I tried to stop Starlight, she was able to get away, and it's pretty obvious that her group killed Tech Knight. And if her group knew about the party, that means that Cameron Coleman wasn't the leak. Then, of course, you've got Sister Sage, who chokes in the biggest moment, and Homelander can figure out exactly what Firecracker's doing. She's trying to make it look like either Sister Sage is the leak, or she's useless when you actually need her, or maybe both. Homelander doesn't want to hear any of it, though, and he tries to cut Firecracker off, but Firecracker insists on continuing to talk. She has stuff to say to Homelander. She basically vows to be everything he needs. She will be his loyal servant, and she's gone to extreme measures. Those measures are taking hormones to ensure that she has breast milk in order to satisfy that urge that Homelander hasn't had since Madeline Stillwell was around. And Homelander takes full advantage. As Homelander is suckling at the teat of Firecracker, it looks like Firecracker has gotten the biggest soup in the world finally in her corner. While that's happening in Vought Tower, back at the Flatiron Building, Starlight and Huey meet up to go listen to exactly what was discussed during that meeting, because Huey was able to drop off some of the bugs, and they're pretty floored at everything that Victoria Newman is saying. While listening to it, though, Huey finally breaks down. All the things that went down with his dad and then being kind of tortured a little bit. It's just a lot for Huey, and he admits to Annie, "I'm not fine," while he cries. Kimiko, she wasn't there to see any of this. She went back to the prison where the prison guard has to let her know. Kimiko, "I don't think your prisoner wants to see you." Kimiko writes a note to the prison guard that just says, "I have nowhere else to go." And Mother's Milk, he was being discharged from the hospital. Thank you so much for checking out this recap. Please consider subscribing to the channel and subscribing to my Patreon. Hit thumbs up if you liked it. Smash that thumbs down button if you thought it sucked. If you left a comment, I don't get back to you. I usually don't check the comments unless they're like a super comment. Also, if you don't see the next video up on the end screen, not to worry, it'll be up in a day or two.